Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and I hope everyone is doing all right today. So in this video, I'm going to be doing another video on my Digital Art for Newbies series that I'm going to be working on. And in this video, I will be talking about Photoshop brushes and which ones are good to use. I see this question get asked quite a bit in digital art forums and digital art pages on Facebook. A lot of people ask, what brushes should I use? What brushes are good? Etc., etc. And I've watched a few videos on this myself, and I don't consider myself an expert, but I would like to share my thoughts with you on it. This is another video again for the people that are new to digital art, so if you're a more experienced artist who really knows what you're doing already, then this video probably isn't for you and you probably won't get much out of it. But if you're new and wondering what brushes you should use, then stick around. I hope that this is informative to you. The answer that I've basically come to is that the best brush that most people say you should learn to use is just your basic hard round brush that Photoshop comes with by default. That's kind of a bit of a boring answer, I know, because there's a lot of really cool custom brushes out there, but you need to use those as tools and not as crutches. And it's really easy to do because custom brushes can be a really awesome, really powerful tool, but no hating on them. I mean, look at this. I have a ton of custom brushes. Some of them I've paid for, some of them I've gotten for free. You can download them on DeviantArt, you can get them on other websites. Like, I love my custom brushes. No hate whatsoever. But learn to use your hard round brush. After that, your soft round brush or your airbrush has its purposes. And I'm a big fan of my hard round pressure size brush and my hard round pressure opacity brush. And these four brushes here, sorry, are actually all in Photoshop's default brushes that you get just in your general brushes. And the reason why you need to learn to use these is because these are some really just basic tools that Photoshop comes with no fancy bells or whistles. And learning to use these and learning how to be an artist with the basic tools will help you improve as an artist instead of just having you rely on fancy tools that handhold you and do all the work for you. Because at the end of the day, the tools don't make the artist knows how to use the tools effectively. Now that being said, there is one custom brush, which is this sketch brush that I got from another brush pack myself, and I've edited my own to be a little bit different, but it is a brush that has this kind of liney texture to it, and it kind of duplicates the look of a pencil. I like to use this for sketching, just personal preference only. I think it looks a little more appealing for just roughing out some sketches and trying to get an idea for what I'm going to do. I use it with the opacity turned down, and I also use it a little bit smaller. And I will use that to sketch whatever it is I'm doing just to get started with when I'm working on a new piece. I have seen some other artists say that instead of using a hard round brush, they prefer to use a hard square brush or even a hard triangle brush, but still, it's just another shape for a basic hard brush. They just prefer that shape instead of round. So at that point, that's just your personal preference. But that being said, I'm not just going to leave you hanging on, oh, hey, just use the hard round brush. I'm actually going to try to explain why, and I'm going to go over a little bit why these different brushes have their uses in different ways, because the hard round, the airbrush, and the pressure opacity, I just like the pressure opacity. You can do without it, but I like it for helping to create gradients when I'm working with hard edges. But each of these brushes has a purpose that they fall into, and it depends on what you're doing. All right, I have some examples of a few portraits that I just Googled searched. I have a few just portraits of a few people here. I've converted them into grayscale because it's the values here that matter more than color. Color is completely irrelevant for this video. So, talking about the brushes and how they get used, I will be using these as examples and talking about when to use different brushes for their different purposes. Now, the thing that you need to remember about brushes is there's two types of main brushes. There's hard and soft-edged brushes. So a brush with a hard edge will, I don't need that right now. A brush with a hard edge will have a defined edge that doesn't look fuzzy. It is hard, it is defined, it's not fuzzy at all. Whereas the soft edge brushes, which is what the airbrush is, it's just a brush that is got the softness turned up or hardness turned down, has this fuzzy looking soft edge that isn't very defined. A lot of people like to use the airbrush or the soft brush to create gradients with because you get really pretty transitions with it. The problem is, though, that you don't get defined edges even when you're coloring with it, and it can make portraits or paintings look kind of muddy. That is the reason why people will tell you, learn to use the hard brush. Or some people say the hard round because it's a default that Photoshop comes with. But again, a hard square brush works for the same reason. I will demonstrate this for you real quick. Go back to my thing here and select a circle. So, a lot of people like to use the airbrush for shading because you can get these gorgeous transitions with it by turning your opacity down a little bit or just using pressure opacity settings. And you can transition from light to dark really beautifully with the airbrush. I'm a big fan of doing this myself. I love how it looks. But there's a time and a place to use the airbrush to do this, and it isn't everywhere. So what I just did here is, it looks like I just shaded a sphere, but I've created a value gradient going from light to dark. And because of using the airbrush, it transitions really smoothly between the different areas, and there's no like lines there that you can see. And it looks really appealing to the eye, but it doesn't work for everything. Now you can do the same thing with a hard brush. It just takes a little bit more effort, and it gets you a little bit of a different result. I'm going to start with dark down here. All right. Let's do some white over here. All right, so I'm going to go from dark to light like so. Grab some actual, like, true white there. And boop. All right, so I'm going to turn my opacity down because I'm trying to create a gradient, and you can't do a gradient with 100% opacity. And this is how you actually blend with a hard round brush. Blah. I'm probably not going to be doing much editing on this video because I'm trying to, like, be genuine, so forgive the fact that I'm not a good speaker. But the idea here is you turn down your opacity to 20%, 25%, 15 or 10%, whatever it is you're comfortable using. I'll stop at 18% right there. And we use the color drop tool here. And now we're going to create a gradient going from dark to light by doing a few strokes and sampling after a few strokes and just continually sampling and working our way towards white. Let's come back to white a little bit. And the idea here is to be subtle, which is why we turn down the opacity so much, and it's why we color pick so frequently, is we're trying to create a similar gradient to what we have up here, going from light to dark, and we want to show the different values in that gradient. And the idea is to blend them together in a way that is smooth, or as smooth as possible. And if we do too much, I'm actually turn down my opacity a little more because it's just too much, then it won't look subtle, and then our gradient won't be as convincing. And if I was smart, I would be using hotkeys, but I'm lazy and I don't feel like leaning forward in my chair to use my keyboard. So shame on me for that, but it is what it is. A little more of this value here. I'll go back to black a little bit. Alright, the hotkey for that is Alt. If you hold Alt, that's the hotkey for color picking. If you want to do this the appropriate way, then you don't have to keep mousing over the tool. And this is the best way to do this, actually, is to actually be sitting straight with, your keyboard right in front of you, and then you can use your hotkeys correctly. Alright, so what I've just done here is I've demonstrated the difference between creating a value gradient from dark to light using both the hard round and the soft round brushes. And you see the difference here. When you look at the soft round, you don't have these little lines here. It's just a very soft, smooth transition, really appealing to the eye. Whereas when you use the hard round brush, you can still get the same color gradient, but you have these kind of like hard lines here. And that's the main difference between hard and soft brushes. And there's a point to this. There's a reason why you want to mix the two brushes. You don't just want to use hard brushes all the time in the grand scheme of things. The soft brush has its place, but it's more important to learn to use the hard round brush first, because if you use the soft round brush, you'll never have a defined edge in places where you need it. I'm going to go to my portrait examples here, and I'm going to talk about places where the hard round and soft and hard brushes would be useful. And it mainly comes down to lighting and shadows and creating defined edges in your shapes. So I'm going to go to my lasso tool here to point this out. So over here, this little highlight right here, that's a great spot where you would use a soft brush to create a little splash of highlight there, because you can see the nice little transition that is nice and smooth from shadow to light right there. Another good spot where you would use the soft brush to create the shadows is this shadow here where the nose is, because again, you can see the soft gradient. And the light right here would also be a great place to use the soft brush. But you would want to use your hard brush to originally draw this entire portrait and define the planes of the face, and then go back in with your soft brush and define those soft little highlights and the soft shadows. Move on to another example. So this example here has a nice example of some harder shadows. For example, this shadow right here would be a spot where you would want to use a hard brush to create that shadow, and use a hard brush to create this big shadow over here, and then maybe transition from the hard brush to the soft brush to create this softer gradient here, and then use your soft brush to create a softer gradient with the highlight here on the cheek. And basically anywhere that you have a hard defined line, use a hard brush. And then when you get used to using the hard brush for basically everything, start going in and using your soft brushes to create these softer transitions. Now this is an example that I liked because it has good examples of both hard defined edges as well as soft edges. This entire spot right here, oops, wrong select tool. This entire spot right here could be done with hard brushes. Same thing for this spot right here. This entire area right here, hard brush. But then this pretty little highlight here on the cheek, you would go in and you would add this highlight with a soft brush. This transition right here, you would use a soft brush for. This dark shadow right here, again, this entire area here, you would use a hard brush for, and then you could switch to a soft brush and get this highlight in here on the chin. The lips, these bright, harsh highlights on the lips, you would do these. That's hard brush all the way. You wouldn't want to use a soft brush for that. If you did, it would look undefined and it wouldn't look as sharp and convincing as it is here. But these spots here, these little highlights within the shadows, again, that's all soft brush. So I don't like it when people tell you, oh, just use the hard brush, because they're not telling you that, like this right here, you would use a hard brush to define the shape of her forehead and a soft brush to create the transition from more of a white to more of a gray over here. But anyways, what I was saying is that they don't tell you that the soft brush has its purpose specifically for the softer transitions and the softer highlights and stuff, whereas the hard brush is there for your hard cast shadows or your soft or your harder highlights. Like, they each have a purpose, and you need to use each in the right way. But your foundation needs to be built on the hard brush, because if you don't have any defined edges at all, which you cannot get with a soft brush, your image will look fuzzy and undefined and just kind of muddy and unappealing to the eye. So learn to use the hard brush first, and then start using the soft brush to create the nicer transitions after you've defined your planes and your shapes and your edges with your hard brush. Everything I've talked about so far was pretty much specifically about defining your edges and getting your shades and your highlights in, and keeping in mind, is it a soft edge or is it a hard edge? But as far as what brush you use for actually drawing with for digital art, I want to just make it really clear that I'm not a professional here, so take my word for what it's worth, but I really don't think it matters what brush you choose to draw with. Your ability to draw is really all that matters with that, so you can use a hard round brush and sit here and, you know, draw a person just as easily as you could sit and use a square brush or a pressure opacity brush. It really doesn't matter. Just use whatever it is that's appealing to you. I don't think that there's really like a right way to sit and sketch, because at the end of the day, that's kind of just a rough draft anyways of what we're going to be doing. So this little ugly person here that I'm doing, like, I'm only doing this to communicate the fact to you that regardless of what brushes you end up using to paint with, the brushes that you use to draw your stick people with or block in your scene with, it doesn't matter. You're going to just get rid of these layers anyways, or turn their opacity down and then go back over them with different brushes later. So just use whatever you like. You could use the hard round. You can use a sketch brush like this one, a square brush if that's what you want to use. The square and triangle brush here that I have, they're not actually in Photoshop's default brushes, neither is my sketch brush, which, by the way, I really like. But if you're interested in them, I will put them on my DeviantArt and put a link to that in the description of this video, and you can go check out those brushes if you want to. I'll just put them on my DeviantArt and you can download them for free. So yeah, use whatever you want for sketching with. It really doesn't matter until you get into your shading and your lighting and defining your values and your shapes. You really want to make sure that your shapes are well defined with hard edges and that your soft lights and soft shadows, use your soft brush for those. And then you can use the soft brush also for blending colors and whatnot later with like skin and stuff like that once you get your shapes defined. And there's other artists that have made videos on that. I can make one in the future, but that's really all I wanted to say in this video. Thank you. So, I hope that this was informative to some of you, and thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.